I've shared with you just a few of the reasons on why we think BYU might be a good fit for you. The second question I told you I'd answer today is how to get into BYU. What does it take to be admitted now? Take a look with me at this graph that demonstrates the population of LDS 18-year-olds in the U.S. and Canada. Over the last decade, you can notice that that population has slightly declined, but in the subsequent decade, it's scheduled only to rise. With that context of BYU's population hovering around 30,000 students over the last 20 years, it's interesting to note that the number of applications from high schoolers seeking BYU admission over the last decade has only continued to rise. In fact, this last year, for the first time, BYU admissions received over 11,000 applications from students in high school seeking new freshman admission. You understand that with enrollment not having changed much, BYU's new freshman class always hovers at around 7,000 admitted students. With the number of applications continuing to rise, and yet the number of admission slots remaining the same per the Board of Trustees' invitation to the admissions committee, that would only mean one thing, that the number of students who have to be denied with the number of admission slots available only continues to rise as well. You can see that with that number increasing, the challenge of being admitted to BYU is only growing. We want today to answer that question of how to get into BYU. Now let's take a look at what the committee will use to evaluate your application for admission if you're seeking BYU admission right out of high school. First, we'll take a look at a standardized test score. That's an ACT or SAT. Notice I mentioned both tests. Both are standardized test scores that help with college admission. With BYU, we'll look at either test. We'll use the highest composite test score to evaluate your admission application. We'd recommend taking each test a second time. We know they cost money, but if you can, 60% of students who take those tests a second time raise their score generally. Next, the committee will look at a high school GPA. That's an unweighted high school GPA on a 4.0 scale. Beyond standardized test scores and high school grades, the committee will look at some other elements that certainly influence the admission decision. A few I'll mention here. Your service in church, school, community. That would be in young men's, in young women's, in scouting, in community service, school, in the church, all of that type of service. In addition, AP or IB courses. That's advanced placement or international baccalaureate courses. The committee will give additional strength for each of those types of classes that you've taken. The committee recognizes standardized national types of classes, and AP or IB both fulfill those. Unique personal circumstances. The committee is interested in you and who you are, what you've overcome, where you're coming from, perhaps a challenge that you've faced, you or your family, and how you dealt with it. We learn about those things from your essays or comments from your bishop or a member of the stake presidency, or from comments that your seminary teacher makes about you. Talents and creativity. That's BYU's nifty way of saying, we want to hear about your athletics, dance, music, art, theater, speech, writing. It goes on and on. Anything outside the classroom that you've done. Leadership. We're not just looking for leaders of title. However, the committee is very interested in the leadership you've developed in the classroom, in a club, in student government, in scouting, in priesthood, in young women's, all of that type of leadership the committee wants to evaluate, including your leadership in community, for example. The last factor in that admissions decision is seminary attendance. Whether you're attending early morning seminary or release time, the committee wants to see that you are on pace to complete 4 years of seminary. For those who might be in a rare circumstance of not having 4 full years completed by the end of the senior year, the committee will look at that. However, well over 95% of our admitted students are 4-year seminary graduates, so we encourage you to keep that up. Now, we haven't covered concurrent enrollment or dual enrollment, classes where you can receive both high school and college credit through a local college or university while you're still in high school. Those won't be part of the admissions decision at all, though those are very noteworthy and we commend you for obtaining college credit while still in high school. The admissions decision will not factor in any college credit that you've received during high school. However, though that won't be part of that admissions pie or that decision-making process, it certainly can be advantageous for you when you show up at BYU to have some college credit having granted already so that you have fewer classes to take potentially at BYU. You can see and receive more information about how those college courses you've taken in high school could grant you BYU credit at the URL transfer.byu.edu. You have learned that AP or IB courses will be elements in the admissions decision. In addition, you can receive college credits for those tests that you have passed. Visit apib.byu.edu to see more how those classes can give you college credit if you pass those given AP or IB exams. Now that I've shown you the elements that go into the BYU admissions decision, let's take a look at the class of 2010, those 7,000 freshmen or so who were admitted and how they stacked up among that admissions pie. This first graph you can see shows the distribution of the standardized test scores of these 7,000 students who were admitted. You can see it ranges from a 20 ACT or the SAT equivalent all the way up to a perfect ACT of 36. Notice that it's peaking around that average of a 28 ACT. I remind you though, that is an average. You know what the definition of an average is. About half or so of the students would have been below that average, about half above, for example. Many students below that average 28 ACT were admitted. And now that you've seen the pieces of that admissions pie, you can understand that would be because the committee is looking at all parts of an applicant's application. Now let's take a look at this next graph. It shows the distribution of the unweighted high school GPAs of those 7,000 new freshmen who were admitted for the class of 2010. You can see it ranges from a 3.0 all the way to a perfect 4.0. Its peak, it averages about a 3.8 or so of those new freshmen coming in. However, I remind you that that is an average, not by any means a requirement or a minimum for admission. Once again, the committee is looking at grades, standardized test scores, and everything else. Hence, some students who might not have that 3.8 GPA or so could possibly still be admitted, right? Because we're looking at everything. We've looked at grades, we've looked at test scores of the 7,000 students who were admitted in the class of 2010. But how do they stack up in the other areas in that admissions pie? You can see a few of the examples here of what they've done beyond the classroom. Over 70% of the young men have earned the Eagle Scout Award, for example. Or you can see that over 1/3 of the incoming freshman class performed over 200 hours of service during their high school years. Or another example, only 2% of the incoming freshman class were student body presidents during high school. Just giving you a partial glimpse of the incoming class of 2010. All right, Whitney, take it away.
Who doesn't love BYU chocolate milk?
This is so good, guys.
Of course it is, so here's my question. How many gallons of chocolate milk does BYU sell a year? Is it A, 34,450? Is it B, 26,700 gallons? Or is it C, 82.5 gallons? If you guessed A, you're right. BYU sells 34,450 gallons of chocolate milk every year.
Now let's take a look at the church involvement of these admitted students. You can see 97% served in a quorum or class presidency during high school, or over 80%, or more than 4 out of every 5 students earned the Young Womanhood Recognition Award or the Duty to God Award. We point these out so that you have some context of each of the admitted students. You can see that a student who has done some of these wonderful things might not be setting himself or herself apart by earning these awards or doing these wonderful things in high school. However, in order to try to keep up with the competition of each of the applicants, we encourage students to be very